He's the Vice President of Product Development for tZERO. Rob Christensen is kicking off the presidential lecture series tomorrow night. He joins us now live on Montana Talks. Rob, great to have you on the show this morning.
Good morning, Aaron. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So what's the focus of your talk going to be? I guess what's your thesis that you're going to present tomorrow night?
Yeah, so I really hope to demystify, the blockchain and the underlying technology, and kind of cover some different use cases, that kind of touches on different industries and practical applications of blockchain technology.
Yeah, I've got a friend that I was chatting with, very accomplished guy, and he says, "Hey, you guys got to get on board with this cryptocurrency stuff." He was telling me, he says, Wyoming, they're like apparently one of the most cryptocurrency friendly states in the nation. So I don't know if you're tracking much of what's going on in Wyoming and what they're doing that maybe we could do in Montana or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So Wyoming's been very progressive in terms of getting legislation passed around how institutions such as banks can custody cryptocurrencies and digital assets for investors. And they have started a coalition to start getting similar legislation presented and hopefully passed in Montana, Idaho, and also in Utah.
And one of the first questions I guess I should probably throw out there for you is, how would you define crypto? Because when I was chatting with this friend of mine, I said, oh yeah, like Bitcoin. He's like, no, you got to think about it different. Bitcoin's just one kind of cryptocurrency. He said you got to think about it in a much bigger viewpoint. So I guess, what is cryptocurrency, and what's the terms that we should even just start by using?
Sure. So cryptocurrency, right? If you think about money, the U.S. dollar, you have physical bills, but the majority of money today just exists in computers as zeros and ones. Cryptocurrency works similar, where, a coin or a token is basically a representation of value. The blockchain technology is just the rails that it runs on to facilitate transactions between two parties. And then you kind of get into different currencies with different purposes. So, Bitcoin's kind of become a de facto store of value similar to gold, right, where people will hold it, but where the transaction fees on it are fairly high. There are other cryptocurrencies that have been launched that have been designed to be more of a micropayment system and also a peer-to-peer payment system. So the right way to think about it, and kind of what separates a cryptocurrency from a security token or a digital asset, a cryptocurrency is more of a bearer instrument, like a U.S. dollar. Whoever holds it is the owner of that, where security tokens and digital assets work more similar to stock in a company, like an equity, and there's underlying legal ownership right tied to that token. And the blockchain technology really just facilitates the transfer of that, and it reduces a lot of the friction in the system that prevents this from being transferred in a non-digital form.
So what's the, and I think you kind of answered this, but what's the fundamental value of this cryptocurrency? I mean, it's fundamentally based on eventually get enough people that own enough of it. I mean, how would you break it down for the layman out here on what it means and where the value is actually derived from for these types of cryptocurrency?
Sure. So if you take like the example of Bitcoin, Bitcoin derives its value from the work that goes in to produce it. So this is both in terms of the electricity that powers the servers, but also the large algorithms that these computers are running through to mine these, really large prime numbers, essentially. And this is referred to as proof of work, meaning about every 10 minutes, a block is closed on the Bitcoin blockchain. And it's basically a race where all of these machines around the world are consuming energy to solve these impossibly large equations. The first machine to solve it will close that block and will receive an award in terms of Bitcoin for doing that. And this is basically how they incentivize people to run a node on the network. And then you also have more traditional market forces at play, right? It derives its value just through demand. Somebody that wants to hold that asset can purchase it in USD, and somebody that holds it can decide to either sell it at $10,000 a Bitcoin or $8,000 a Bitcoin. So there are more traditional market forces at play as well that create some of the volatility and the value of it. But mainly it's derived from the work it takes to actually mine the Bitcoins and the energy being consumed to do so.
Well, and I talked with a friend here in Billings, and his son was a recent college graduate and, down in Denver, and apparently he made a lot of money getting in on this type of stuff early on. So some folks have made a lot of money getting involved in this, but the market's been a little more down recently. If I remember right, has it been a little bit down more recently?
Yeah, so, at its peak, it topped out just around $20,000 a Bitcoin. It's currently trading about $8,000 a Bitcoin, depending on what exchange you're trading on.
So would you say it's kind of a buyer's market right now then, potentially, or could it go a little bit lower?
In the last 6 months, it's been as low as $4,000. So I would say you're probably still in a buyer's market now. The neat thing about Bitcoin is there's going to be a finite amount of them. It's been designed, to kind of counter inflation. So unlike, the U.S. dollar, where more of it can be printed endlessly and kind of deflate the value of it, at a certain point, all of the Bitcoin that can be created will be created. There will be a finite supply of it. And I think that the value is going to continue to climb as demand stays high for these digital currencies. So I think it is still a buyer's market, but I'm not a financial advisor, so make sure you do your due diligence and do your homework before you make a decision to invest in any cryptocurrency.
Always got to get those disclosures out there. I know I've got a lot of friends here in town that are great financial advisors. It's like, hey, you got to join me on the radio. And they're like, you wouldn't believe the number of hurdles I would have to clear just to talk on the radio about the markets and everything else. But
sure.
We're talking with Rob Christensen, the Vice President of Product Development for tZERO. He's going to be in town. I think he might be headed this direction right now, but you're going to be the keynote speaker for the lecturer for, I think this is the inaugural presidential lecture series taking place at Rocky Mountain College. So tomorrow night, Thursday, September 12th, 5 p.m. One of the questions that I've heard is kind of being kicked around there too is, or at least the question that a lot of us might have is, at what point does cryptocurrency become mainstream? At what point do all the major banks say, all right, okay, this thing's legit, and then they start folding it into their operations as well? Or is there another way that you think cryptocurrency is seeking more legitimacy?
Sure. So I think, the recent Facebook announcement with Libra, where Facebook is kind of going to launch their own cryptocurrency, I think you're going to see a mass adoption once it's brought into social media by a giant like Facebook. For the major banks, it's really a matter of regulation, right? Because everything's FDIC insured and they have to follow, the rules set by different regulators. I think you'll see as regulation adopts, most of the banking laws were written in the 1930s, 1940s, and 1970s. Once we see some of the banking regulations and financial laws kind of catch up to what the technology is capable of, I think you'll see governments start to issue their own cryptocurrencies. I think you'll see banks starting to offer more assets in a digital form. And you mentioned earlier Wyoming. Wyoming's actually been pretty progressive in terms of getting new laws passed around digital assets for banks. So we've actually seen quite a few banks start to migrate and set up shop in Wyoming for that purpose. And like anything else, you'll see early adopters that'll get in, and then you'll see some of the banks that are more established are going to sit back and wait and see what happens with the regulation before they come in full force.
Yeah, and I want to get your take on kind of the regulatory environment as well, because I know, the Treasury Department, obviously, they're probably somewhat concerned. They're like, well, wait, we got our own currency. Wait, you're talking an alternative currency here. Whoa, whoa, whoa. So I'd be interested in your take on that. But going back to, you mentioned Wyoming and how some banks now are setting up shop in Wyoming because of Wyoming being such a cryptocurrency-friendly state. Wyoming, you talked about energy, power lines. You name it. Montana. Hey, we're the Saudi Arabia of coal. We've got wind, hydro, solar, natural gas. You name it. And so some I know of some of the Bitcoin developers, I think, had some some of their data centers located here across the state in parts. So we've got a great opportunity on that standpoint here in Montana as well because of the energy supply that we've got available. So do you see that also playing into Montana's kind of opportunity on this front?
Yeah, absolutely. And all of this rides, on the internet and across the distributed network of nodes that's running these networks. And to actually mine it, you have to have access to a low-cost energy source because there becomes a tipping point where the cost of energy consumption versus the value of the currency being mined on the network, it actually will no longer be profitable to mine at a certain point. So having access to cheap energy is key. You actually saw a lot of miners move all of their equipment, all of their rigs to Iceland, where geothermal energy is super cheap, right? So
interesting.
I think Montana definitely has an opportunity, and I'm hoping more states will kind of follow suit with Wyoming as well, because you guys have opportunity to leapfrog some of the larger populous states like California and New York, where the legislation is going to move much slower. And I think it'll attract businesses. I think it'll attract new financial industry to the states because of the progressive laws. Very
fascinating stuff. Well, I'd love to keep the conversation going, but I know we're short on time, and I know you got some travel plans because we're going to see you here in Billings tomorrow night at Rocky Mountain College. tZERO Vice President of Product Development, Rob Christensen. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for calling in this morning.
Thank you, Aaron.